And then we had a very interesting 3-day period here, speaking of 2002. We'll start 19 years ago this week on June 23rd, 2002. WWE presented its final King of the Ring pay-per-view and its first under the WWE initials from Columbus, Ohio. This marked the arrival of one Brock Lesnar, who beat Test and Rob Van Dam to win the crown. The first stop on his march to the undisputed title at SummerSlam that year. Kurt Angle beat Hulk Hogan by submission with the ankle lock in the most shocking thing on the entire show. Hogan had never submitted before as a babyface in his career. He did a few times as a heel, but never as a babyface. I mean, not that I can remember, never as a babyface. So him tapping out was a big deal. And in the main event, one of the worst WWE pay-per-view main events of all time, especially when you consider the star power that was involved, The Undertaker retained the undisputed title over Triple H. This match was a complete bore fest, and it turned into an overbooked mess with ref bumps and a terrible roll-up with the tights hooked by The Undertaker for the win. Couldn't even get a good finish. Undertaker then challenged The Rock, who had come out. He was all the way down the aisleway. Challenged The Rock to come on down to the ring, which he obliged. Rock had I think he had just been brought back to television maybe a week before. He was called back early after Steve Austin walked out. Rock had been gone for a few months filming a movie. Rock comes down to the ring. He lays out Undertaker with a spine buster and a people's elbow. But then Triple H gives him a pedigree before Undertaker then recovers and gives Triple H a chokeslam. And it wasn't until much later that I realized why this match may have been so terrible. I say may have because even without an injury, Triple H was so roided up by this point. He just was not the same wrestler he was before the first quad tear. You know, that's why I say on my show a lot of times I've mentioned the fact that I think the 2000 version of Triple H was peak Triple H in the ring. In my opinion, it's my favorite version of Triple H, the McMahon-Helmsley regime version of Triple H from January of 2000 on. By 2002, he was just so much, physically, so much bigger, and he had you know, that major injury that he just wasn't the same. I mean, he was unnaturally big. Now, later in 2002, he ended up having some great matches with Shawn Michaels. But before that, he was just not the same worker. But there was a story behind this. Triple H came into the match with a pretty serious elbow injury that he had operated on 2 days after the show. He had the elbow operated on by Dr. Jim Andrews in Birmingham, the same Dr. Andrews who repaired his torn quad. And the hope was that he would be back in time for the Vengeance pay-per-view the following month for what probably would have been a triple threat match for the title against The Undertaker and The Rock, based on what they did here at the end of this pay-per-view. He ended up not being ready for that match, and instead Kurt Angle took his place, and the three of them went on to have one of the greatest triple threat matches in WWE history. That's one of my favorite matches. I mean, when you think of great triple threats in this company, you think of the WrestleMania 20 main event. You think of Cena, Rollins, and Lesnar from Royal Rumble in 2015. But you need to be thinking of that main event too, from Vengeance. Now, one more note on this show. I vividly remember Chris Jericho freaking the fuck out on the internet fans when this show was over, because Jericho at the time had a website and he had a blog. And he would regularly post on the internet. He really was one of the earliest wrestlers to interact with his fans online. And he was fairly active on there. But there was some criticism about his match in the semifinals on this show, which he lost to Rob Van Dam. And he blew a gasket. So I scoured the archives of this vast thing that we call the internet, because I knew that this had to live on somewhere. Obviously, the original page is not up anymore. I don't think the website is up anymore. So I scoured and looked around, and I was able to locate the blog that he posted on his website later that same night. The criticism bothered him so much, He was so gotten to that he posted this diatribe early on the morning of June 24th. It's a little long, but I think it's worth reading in full. It's titled, "Hello, Jackoffs." I guess that's you and me. He says, "All right, I've had it. You want a war? Now you've got one. I'm suffering from a bout of insomnia, so I decided to go on the web and check out the reviews of the King of the Ring from tonight, more specifically on the PW Torch website. After reading what all of you smarks, and believe me, you are all still marks, had to say about my match and the show, I am furious. Everybody has the right to an opinion, and here's mine. I am sick of all you holier-than-thou pompous jackasses. That's it. That's all. Baby goes to sleep now. I had one of my best matches of the year tonight with RVD that featured 20 minutes of tremendous action, innovative false finishes, and an absolutely tremendous crowd. It was everything I could have asked for in a match, and it was, in my opinion, an off-the-charts performance from RVD and myself, match of the year caliber. I was so excited about the contest and can humbly state that we stole the show. The crowd was so into it that they were burned out after we went on and quiet for the next 3 to 4 matches. They ate up every move from start to finish and they enjoyed the hell out of it. But now I read the opinions of some of you. Many of you state that the match was very good or excellent. I agree. But many others are saying that the match was slow and predictable, with one jackass even saying it was one of the worst matches of my career. How can you honestly say that? What the hell do you people want? What is it that you're looking for? We go out there and we bust our asses to entertain you, and if the Columbus fans were quiet, they sure as hell weren't during my match. They were entertained. And your thoughts were that bad? Well, if you didn't like my match tonight, then you are out of luck if you're a Jericho fan. Because it was the best you're going to get, jerky. That was CJ at his finest. Wrestling at its finest. A great 4.5-star performance with a tremendous build, a great crowd, and an awesome match. If you didn't like it, then stop watching me and stop watching the WWE and take up bowling, because you will never like anything that we give you. I'm the first one to admit when my performance is not up to snuff, or when something was bad and I'm the most self-critical person on the WWE roster. But tonight's performance was me at my finest. Didn't like it? Get the F out, and good riddance to you. For all of you that enjoyed my match, I say thanks. For those that didn't like it, I don't care, because I'm through with you. And here's the best part of this, especially in hindsight. I am now finished with the internet. And I'm finished with this site because I hate what you marks are doing. You've spoiled it for me. Your negativity is ridiculous. You all come off like a bunch of bitter know-it-alls who won't be happy with anything we give you. Nothing is ever good enough, and quite frankly, I'm over it. You are the same people that are saying that Attack of the Clones is boring. Analyzing every little detail instead of allowing yourselves to be entertained by its magic. It seems that some of you wish the wrestling business would dry up and die because some of you dislike everything we do. Is it always good? No. But we are killing ourselves to try to entertain you, and if you don't respect that, then kiss my ass. I want the business to be around forever, and I am doing my part to keep it great, and I did that tonight, no matter what any of you think. A lot of the boys pandered to you on their websites, asking for your input and your thoughts, and I used to be one of them. But guess what? Not anymore. Think what you want. I don't care. Do what you want. I don't care. Respond how you want, because I won't be reading. I don't give a damn about what you think anymore. One of the best wrestlers in the world and one of the performers in the best match of the night and match of the year candidate from the King of the Ring, signed Chris Jericho. Well, I love how he was finished with the internet until he started a podcast many years later on that same internet. I guess he had a change of heart. Jericho did indeed continue to post on the message board forums on his website, which he was known to post on, but not nearly as often. He was not posting nearly as often as he had done before his little rant here. For the record, I thought he and RVD did have the best match on the entire pay-per-view, And it was a very good match. Maybe not to the level that he describes it, but it was still very good. 24 hours later, on June 24th, 2002, Bret the Hitman Hart suffered a stroke after falling off of his bicycle, hitting a pothole in Calgary, and flipping forward over the handlebars at a relatively high rate of speed, landed on his back and on the back of his head. This was only a few days before his 45th birthday. Suffered a blood clot on the right side of his brain. That caused temporary paralysis on the left side of his body. He was not wearing a helmet. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, I believe he was on his way to pick up his helmet. I guess maybe his helmet needed to be repaired. Maybe it was the strap or something. I don't know, but I could have sworn that he was actually headed to the bike shop to retrieve his helmet. But he suffered a pretty bad landing and a pretty bad stroke, which makes his recovery all the more impressive. The fact that if you look at him today, and you would never even know that he suffered a stroke. I mean, there might be little ticks and stuff, for all we know that maybe he notices, but he really did make a miraculous recovery for someone who was at first totally bedridden, like I said, paralyzed on one side, didn't know what the future would hold for himself. And it was a pretty serious situation. I think Vince McMahon was one of the first people, to call and check on him, when he got the news about what had happened. And in any event, it was a very serious thing. I remember hearing about that at the time and being very sad. He had already retired. Bret had the concussion issues. And a lot of people think that the concussion issues is really what led to the stroke. And at least at the time, I think doctors were of the mindset that they don't believe that it was due to the concussions, and I think Bret has a history of stroke that runs in his family. His mother, before she passed away, had suffered a series of strokes, in her final days. So whatever it was that caused it, he was still a relatively young guy. Like I said, a few days shy of his 45th birthday, and this guy just flies, ass over and lands on his head and suffers a stroke that could very well have ended his life. And all things considered, he made a miraculous recovery. But just one day after that, on June 25th, 2002, at the Smackdown taping in Chicago, a young man by the name of John Cena made his WWE television debut, answering Kurt Angle's open challenge and uttering the words, "Ruthless Aggression," which was a catchphrase that Vince McMahon had mentioned on TV around this time. Actually, it may have been the night before, on Monday Night Raw. This was the beginning of the Ruthless Aggression era. Angle won the match, but Cena made an impression on The Undertaker, who congratulated him in the back after the match, even though Undertaker was a heel at that time. So that was quite the seal of approval from the dead man, which I guess didn't make much of a difference, given that Cena was almost released a few months later. Boy, how things might have been very, very different if they didn't have a John Cena to rely on so heavily for so many years. I mean, you could think of the pros and cons of them not having to rely for so long on John Cena, but believe me, WWE would have been in a lot of trouble if they didn't have a John Cena and couldn't find anybody else to get over the way that Cena did a few years later. Maybe it would have been somebody else. Maybe it would have been Randy Orton. Maybe, Batista could have been elevated a little bit more. I don't know. Cena had a certain level of charisma that those guys just don't have. At least not back then. I think Batista today is actually a pretty charismatic guy. But the Batista from back then was very different than the Hollywood Batista of today. So I think things worked out pretty well for all parties involved. 18 years ago this week, on the June 23rd, 2003 episode of Monday Night Raw, Raw was live from Madison Square Garden, with Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash teaming up for a win over Ric Flair and Randy Orton, representing Evolution. Goldberg, making his MSG debut, defeated Rodney Mack in a White Boy Challenge. Rodney Mack had been doing these 5-minute challenges on TV with different white jobbers for a few weeks. I remember one where he wrestled 2 white boys at once, and Lillian Garcia introduced the match as a double white boy challenge, because when one does not want one white boy, I guess you go to McDonald's and you order a double with extra cheese. I guess that's how it works. That is until he got to Goldberg. And, he found the one white boy that he couldn't beat. And that was the end of the White Boy Challenge. And in the main event, Triple H defeated Kane to retain the World Heavyweight Championship, and per the stipulation, Kane was forced to unmask. This was the unmasking of Kane. They teased it out for a while before he finally pulled the mask off, and off came his hair too, which was attached to the mask. It was a wig. When he turned around, he had half his head shaved, and the makeup he was wearing was smeared all over his face from the sweat. I guess nobody really thought that through. He looked a lot like the missing link, and maybe even a little bit like this dentist guy that I remember from many years ago who wrestled Bret Hart. I don't think there's any connection between the two. Could just be a coincidence. No burns. There were no burns on his face, which they explained later by the fact that he only thought he was burned for all those years. His scars were not physical, they were psychological. Like me, after years of watching Monday Night Raw. I was not a fan of unmasking Kane, but they did do a good job for a while. They put the black towel on his head, and they would lead him to the ring in chains like an animal. They kept him as a monster, but once that ran its course, I don't know. I just preferred him with the mask, and he eventually started wearing one again. Masked Kane is still the best Kane. When I say masked Kane, I don't mean in the later years. I'm talking about 97 through like 2001. It's my favorite version of Kane.